Don't you dare make me love you. Alice's scream tore through the brownstones' nursery, raw and guttural, the kind of sound that comes from a place deeper than rage, deeper than fear. The baby was crying in her arms. Again, always crying in her arms. Dante stood frozen in the doorway, gun still holstered at his hip, blood, someone else's blood, spattered across his white dress shirt. His eyes were wild, desperate. "Alice, please." "No." She backed against the wall, clutching the infant tighter, her whole body shaking. "You don't get to do this. You don't get to make me—" Her voice cracked. "My son is dead, Dante. He's dead, and I'm feeding yours, and I can't breathe, I can't think, I can't—" Outside, sirens wailed, getting closer. Dante took one step forward, just one, his hands raised, like she was the dangerous one. "They're coming for him," he said, voice stripped bare. "They're coming for my son, and if you leave right now, you're free. I'll tell them you were a hostage. They'll believe it. You walk out that door, this ends. You go back to your life." Alice stared at him, at this man who'd put a target on her back the moment she'd shown him mercy on a rain-soaked bus 8 weeks ago, this man whose world had swallowed her whole. The baby's cries softened against her chest. He knew her heartbeat now, knew her smell, knew her. "You're a monster," she whispered. "I know. People are dead because of you. I know. You should hate you." Dante's jaw clenched. "You should." The siren screamed closer. Seconds now. Maybe less. Alice looked down at the baby, this tiny, perfect thing who hadn't asked to be born into blood and violence, who hadn't asked for a dead mother and a killer father, who only knew that when Alice held him, the world felt safe. Her voice came out broken, barely audible over the chaos outside. "Tell me the truth. Right now, no lies." Dante met her eyes, and for once, she saw past the armor, past the reputation, past everything that made him untouchable. "If I walk away," she said, "what happens to him?" The silence stretched between them like a knife blade. Dante's answer came out hoarse, wrecked. "He dies." 3 months earlier. The M15 bus pulled away from 57th Street in the rain, and nobody knew yet that everything was about to change. If this story just grabbed you by the throat and won't let go, if you need to know how a broke single mother ended up holding a Korean mafia boss's baby while his empire burned down around them, then subscribe right now. Hit that notification bell, because this story doesn't just ask what you'd do for a stranger's child, it asks what you'd become. Drop a comment and tell us, would you walk away or would you stay? Let's find out together. The Korean mafia boss's baby wouldn't stop screaming on the M15 bus, and every passenger knew better than to look. The rain hit them the moment they stepped off the bus, cold, merciless, and somehow appropriate. Alice heard the doors hiss shut behind her, heard the M15 pull away with its cargo of silent witnesses, and realized with a sickening jolt that she was now standing on a wet sidewalk at 34th Street with Dante Kwan and no plan whatsoever. The baby's screams cut through the downpour. Pedestrians swerved around them like water around stone, eyes averted, instincts sharp. "There's a restroom in the terminal," Dante said, voice clipped and businesslike, as if they were discussing a transaction and not something that made Alice's stomach twist with shame and grief and a desperation she didn't want to name. "It's private." Alice nodded, unable to speak. Her coat was already soaked through. She followed him toward the entrance of the Herald Square subway station, her duffel bag banging against her hip with each step, everything she owned reduced to 15 pounds of failure. The terminal bathroom was exactly as depressing as she had expected. Fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, cracked tiles, the sharp chemical smell of industrial cleaner, failing to mask something worse underneath. But it had a lock, and right now, that's all that mattered. Dante stood just inside the door, the baby still crying against his chest. He looked at Alice, then the baby, then back at Alice. For the first time since she'd seen him on the bus, he looked uncertain. "I need to know," he said quietly, barely audible over the crying. "Why would you do this?" Alice's throat tightened. "Does it matter?" Yes. His eyes were dark, unreadable. People don't help me without wanting something, so tell me what you want and we'll negotiate. A bitter laugh escaped her. You think I'm angling for money? Everyone angles for something. I lost my son. The words came out harder than she intended, sharp enough to draw blood. 7 months ago. Sid's. He was 4 months old, and one morning he just stopped breathing. And my body doesn't know he's gone. It keeps producing milk for a baby who'll never need it. So no, Mr. Kwan, I'm not angling. I'm just trying not to drown in my own biology. Something shifted in Dante's expression. Not softening exactly, but recognition. The look of someone who'd also learned what it meant to lose everything in a single moment. Her name was Ji-Yan, he said, each word carefully controlled. She died 2 months ago in childbirth. They said it was a hemorrhage. They said they did everything they could. His jaw tightened. They said a lot of things that don't bring her back. The baby screamed louder, as if sensing his father's anguish. Alice watched Dante's hands tremble slightly as he rocked the infant, this feared man who'd probably ordered executions without flinching, now completely undone by something as simple as a crying baby. She understood that helplessness, had lived inside it for 7 months. "What's his name?" she asked softly. "Theo," Dante said, looking down at his son. "Theodore Ji-Yan Kwan. She chose it, said it meant gift of God." His voice went hollow. Such a gift. Alice felt something crack open in her chest. Before she could second-guess herself, before propriety or shame or common sense could stop her, she reached for the baby. Dante hesitated for just a heartbeat, long enough for Alice to see the war happening behind his eyes, the instinct to protect versus the desperate need for help. Then he carefully transferred Theo into Alice's arms. The weight of him hit her like a physical blow. Warm, solid, real. Her body responded immediately, milk letting down, breasts aching with purpose they hadn't had in months. "Turn around," she said, her voice barely steady. Dante obeyed without argument, facing the graffitied bathroom door while Alice settled on the closed toilet seat. Her hands shook as she adjusted her sweater, as she positioned Theo the way muscle memory still remembered despite everything. The moment he latched, the screaming stopped. Just stopped. The silence was so sudden, so complete, that Alice heard Dante's sharp inhale from across the tiny bathroom, heard the fluorescent lights buzzing, heard her own heart hammering against her ribs. Theo's tiny hand curled against her breast, his eyes fluttering closed, his desperate gulping gradually slowing to a rhythm that Alice's body recognized, like a song she'd forgotten she knew. She looked down at him, this tiny, perfect thing who hadn't asked to be born into blood and violence, who hadn't asked for a dead mother and a killer father, who only knew that when Alice held him, the world felt safe. Her voice came out broken, barely audible over the chaos outside. "Is he—" Dante's voice came out rough, uncertain. "Is it working?" "Yes." He exhaled, a sound that carried more emotion than any words could. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The only sound was Theo feeding, soft and rhythmic and impossibly peaceful after the chaos of the last 30 minutes. Finally, Alice said, "You can turn around." Dante turned slowly, as if afraid sudden movement might shatter whatever spell had been cast. His eyes found the baby first, calm now, feeding quietly, then moved to Alice's face, and what he saw there made her breath catch. Not gratitude, not relief. Terror. Because Dante Kwan, who'd built an empire on control and fear and calculated violence, had just watched a broke stranger perform a miracle he couldn't understand, couldn't replicate, couldn't command, had just realized that his son's survival might now depend on a woman he'd met 20 minutes ago on a city bus, had just realized that Alice Monroe, whether she knew it or not, had become the most dangerous person in his world. The baby's cries drifted closed against her chest. He knew her heartbeat now, knew her smell, knew her. When she looked up again, Dante was still staring at her with those dark, unreadable eyes. "This doesn't make us even," she said quietly. "I'm not yours to own." "I know. And this is just tonight.
Just this once. Dante's expression didn't change, but they both knew she was lying.
Alice refused the money. Refused it 3 times before Dante finally stopped trying to press the envelope of hundreds into her hand outside the subway terminal. "I don't want your money," she said, adjusting her duffel bag on her shoulder. Theo slept peacefully in Dante's arms now, his small face finally relaxed, milk-drunk and calm. "Then what do you want?" Dante asked, and there was something almost dangerous in the question, like he genuinely couldn't comprehend someone doing something without wanting payment. "Nothing. I want nothing from you." "Everyone wants something." Alice met his eyes. "Then maybe I'm not everyone." She turned to walk away, but Dante's voice stopped her. "Let me drive you home." "I can take the subway." "It's after 9. You're carrying everything you own in a bag with a broken zipper." His tone left no room for argument. "Let me drive you home." Alice turned back slowly. "Why?" "Because," he stopped himself, jaw tightening, "because you just did something for my son that no amount of money could buy. The least I can do is make sure you get home safely." That's when Alice noticed them. 2 men in dark suits standing near a black SUV at the curb, watching. Not police, not security guards. Something else. Something that made her skin prickle with instinctive warning. "Those are your people," she said quietly. "Yes. And if I say no, then you take the subway and I worry all night that something happened to you." Dante's expression remained neutral, but his eyes held something that looked almost like sincerity. "Please, just let me do this one thing." Alice glanced at the sleeping baby, then at the 2 men by the SUV, then back at Dante. Every survival instinct she had screamed at her to walk away, to disappear into the subway and never look back. But she was tired, bone-tired, grief-tired, eviction-tired. "Fine," she said, "but just to the corner of my street, not to the door." Dante nodded once, and one of the men opened the SUV's rear door. The ride to the Bronx was silent, except for Theo's soft breathing. Alice stared out the window, watching the city blur past, acutely aware of the weight of Dante's presence beside her, of the driver who said nothing, of the second SUV that followed 3 car lengths behind. This was his world. Black vehicles, armed men, the kind of power that moved through the city like a shadow. When they reached her corner, a run-down street in Hunts Point that looked worse in the SUV's headlight than it did in daylight, Dante walked her to the building entrance despite her protests. "Thank you," he said, and the words sounded foreign in his mouth. "For what you did tonight, I won't forget it." Alice nodded, too exhausted for more words. She watched the SUVs drive away, then climbed 4 flights to the studio apartment she was crashing in until her cousin's boyfriend kicked her out next week. She told herself that was the end of it, that she'd never see Dante Kwan or his baby again. She was wrong. 2 days later, her phone rang from a number she didn't recognize. "He won't eat." Dante's voice was tight, controlled, but she could hear the desperation underneath. "Mr. Kwan?" "He won't take the bottle. I've tried 4 different formulas, 3 different nannies. A pediatrician came to the house." A pause. "Nothing's working. It's been 19 hours. Alice's stomach dropped. 19 hours? He hasn't eaten in... "I know what it means." His voice cracked slightly. "I know, but he's screaming again, and I don't know what to do, and I stopped, the admission clearly costing him. I need your help." Alice closed her eyes. "Mr. Kwan." "Dante. Just Dante." "Dante, this isn't sustainable. You can't call me every time." "I know." Quiet, raw. "But he's going to starve if you don't come. Please." She should have said no, should have given him the number for a lactation consultant, for a hospital, for literally anyone else. Instead, she said, "Where are you?" The address he gave her was in Brooklyn, Park Slope.
The kind of neighborhood where brownstones went for millions and the streets were lined with trees that actually survived. The SUV that picked her up 20 minutes later felt like a hearse. The brownstone was exactly what she'd expected. Elegant, understated, the kind of wealth that didn't need to announce itself. But it was the man who answered the door that caught her off guard. Not Dante. Someone older, Korean, with eyes that assessed her like a threat. "He's here," he said into an earpiece, then stepped aside without a word. The interior was beautiful. Hardwood floors, art on the walls, a curved staircase leading up to the second floor. But Alice barely noticed any of it because Theo's screams were echoing through the house, raw and desperate and terrifyingly weak. Dante appeared at the top of the stairs, the baby in his arms, looking like he hadn't slept in days. "Thank you for coming," he said, and the relief in his voice was almost painful to hear. 30 minutes later, Theo was fed and sleeping in her arms again, and Alice was sitting in Dante's living room trying to process what was happening to her. "This can't keep happening," she said quietly. "I know. I'm not a wet nurse. I can't just drop everything whenever he's hungry." "I know." Dante sat across from her, elbows on his knees, hands clasped. He looked at her with an intensity that made her want to look away. "But there's something you need to understand about my world, about what happened that night on the bus." "What are you talking about?" "In the old Korean underworld, there's a rule, an ancient one." He paused. "When a woman feeds the air, when she gives her body to sustain him, she becomes bound to him, protected by his family, but also," he met her eyes, "claimed by it." Alice stared at him. "That's insane." "It's tradition." "I don't care about your traditions. I'm not part of your world." "You became part of it the moment you fed my son." His voice was gentle but absolute, whether you intended it or not. A laugh burst out of her, high, slightly hysterical. "You can't be serious. This is New York. It's 2026. You can't just claim people because of some ancient mafia rule." But Dante's expression didn't change, didn't soften. And slowly, terribly, Alice realized he wasn't joking. "You're serious. You actually believe this." "It's not about belief. It's about how my world operates. The men who saw you on that bus, the driver, the people in the terminal, they all saw. Word travels fast. By now, everyone knows that Dante Kwan's heir was fed by an outsider, which means you're now under my protection, whether you want it or not." Alice felt her hands start to shake. "I just wanted to help a hungry baby." "I know." "So what? I'm just, what, trapped now? Property?" "Protected," Dante corrected. "There's a difference." "Is there?" Alice looked down at Theo, sleeping peacefully against her chest, completely unaware that his need had just rewritten her entire future. "My son needs you," Dante said quietly, "and what my son needs, he gets. That's how this works." Alice looked up at him, this beautiful, dangerous man who'd somehow turned her act of compassion into a cage. "I should have stayed in my seat," she whispered. Dante's expression flickered with something that might have been regret. "Yes, you probably should have." The baby stirred in her arms, made a small sound of contentment, and settled deeper into sleep. And Alice Munro realized with sickening clarity that she'd traded one kind of grief for another kind of prison, and there was no going back. The first week, Alice told herself it was temporary. She came to the brownstone twice a day, morning and evening, fed Theo, and left. Dante kept his distance, hovering like a shadow in doorways, but never pushing, never demanding more than what she'd agreed to give. By the third week, she had a key. By the third, she stopped going back to the Bronx at all. It wasn't a decision, exactly, more like gravity, like the slow, inevitable pull of something she couldn't name and didn't want to examine too closely. Theo needed her every 4 hours, and the commute was killing her, and Dante had offered the guest room with that careful, neutral expression that revealed nothing. Just until we figure out something else, he'd said.
They both knew there was nothing else to figure out. Now it was week 5, and Alice was sitting in Dante's kitchen at 2 in the morning, Theo sleeping against her shoulder, while the man who'd accidentally imprisoned her made tea he clearly didn't know how to make. "You're supposed to let it steep," she said, watching him pull the bag out after 10 seconds. Dante looked at the cup, then at her. "How long?" 3 minutes. 5 if you like it strong." He put the bag back in, set a timer on his phone, and sat across from her at the marble island. His shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, sleeves rolled to his elbows. He looked exhausted. Human. "You don't have to stay up with me," Alice said quietly. "I know you have whatever it is you do in the morning." "Meetings," he said. "I have meetings." She almost laughed, as if he were an accountant, as if the blood she'd seen on his cuff last Tuesday was just a paper cut. "Right, meetings." Dante's eyes met hers, and something passed between them, an acknowledgement maybe, or a warning. He knew that she knew, and he knew that she was choosing not to ask. "He likes you," Dante said, nodding toward Theo. "The way he relaxes when you hold him. He doesn't do that with the nannies." "Because I'm feeding him. It's biology, not preference." "Maybe," Dante's expression softened slightly. "Or maybe he knows the difference between someone who's paid to care and someone who actually does." The words hung between them, gentle and dangerous. Alice looked down at Theo's sleeping face, his small hand curled against her collarbone. The truth was, she did care. Had started caring somewhere between the bus and the bathroom and the 19 hours of screaming. Had started loving him in the way grief sometimes transforms into something else when you're not looking. "His mother," Alice said softly. "What was she like?" Dante was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was careful. "Strong. Smarter than me. She worked at the gallery in Dumbo, the one with the modern installations." A pause. "She didn't know what I was. Not at first. By the time she found out, she was already pregnant. I offered to let her leave. She stayed anyway." "Did she love you?" "I don't know." Honest. Raw. "I think she tried to." The timer on his phone went off. Dante pulled out the tea bag, took a sip, made a face. "Too strong?" Alice asked. "Perfect," he lied, and took another sip just to prove it. Something in her chest cracked open. Just a little. The violence came in pieces, never direct, never explicit, but always there, hovering at the edges like smoke. Blood on his cuff that he changed shirts to hide. Men in suits who bowed when he entered rooms, their eyes tracking her with calculating interest. Phone calls he took in another language, his voice dropping to something cold and absolute. Once, she came downstairs at dawn and found him standing at the kitchen sink, scrubbing his hands with the methodical intensity of Lady Macbeth. He looked up when she heard her, and for just a second, she saw something haunted in his eyes. "Coffee?" he asked, as if nothing were wrong. "Sure," she said, and they never spoke about it. But she noticed everything, the way his men straightened when he walked past, the deference, the fear, the power that moved through this house like an electric current. And she noticed the way he was with Theo at night, gentle, uncertain, talking to his son in soft Korean that Alice didn't understand, but recognized as love. The way he'd watch her feed the baby with an expression that looked almost like grief. "You're good at this," he said one night, voice quiet in the dimly lit nursery. "I had practice. I'm sorry that you lost him." Alice felt tears prick her eyes. "I'm sorry you lost her." Dante nodded slowly, and for a moment they were just two people drowning in separate oceans, holding on to the same small piece of wreckage. The romantic tension came slowly, so slowly that Alice didn't recognize it at first. It was in the way Dante's hand would brush hers when they passed Theo between them, in the late-night conversations that stretched past exhaustion into something more dangerous,
In the way he looked at her sometimes, not with lust, but with something deeper, recognition maybe, or hunger for something neither of them could name. But he never touched her, never crossed the invisible line they'd drawn. Until the night she found him in the nursery at 3 a.m., just standing over Theo's crib, watching their son sleep. Their son. When had she started thinking of him that way? Dante? She turned and she saw exhaustion carved into every line of his face. I can't stop thinking about what would have happened if you hadn't been on the bus. Alice moved closer, careful. But I was. You shouldn't have been. His voice dropped. You should be somewhere safe, somewhere far away from me and everything I touch. Is that what you want, for me to leave? The silence stretched between them like a blade. No, he finally said, and that's the problem. He reached out, almost unconsciously, and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers lingered for just a heartbeat against her cheek. Then he dropped his hand and stepped back, jaw tight. There's something you need to know, he said. You've been seen with me too many times now, at the brownstone, in the car. Word travels in my world. My enemies know about you, about what you mean to Theo, which means I'm a target. Yes. Alice felt the room tilt slightly. How long have you known? 2 weeks. And you didn't tell me? I increased security, put men on your cousin's building, had your phone traced to make sure no one was following you before you came here. His expression was unreadable. I've been protecting you. I just didn't want you to know you needed protecting. That's not your choice to make. No, he agreed, but I made it anyway. Alice stared at this man who'd trapped her with tradition and need and his son's hunger. This man who just admitted he'd been surveilling her for her own safety. This man who looked at her sometimes like she was the only real thing in a world built on violence and lies. I was invisible before you, she said quietly. Nobody looked at me. Nobody cared where I went or what I did. I was just another broke black woman on the bus. Her voice cracked. And now? Now, Dante said, and there was something almost apologetic in his tone. Now you're the woman who feeds the air, which means every person who wants to hurt me is now watching you, too. Alice closed her eyes, felt the weight of it settle over her like a shroud. The kindness that became a cage, the mercy that painted a target on her back. When she opened her eyes, Dante was still watching her with that dark, unreadable gaze. I can't promise you safety, but I can promise you this. Anyone who tries to hurt you will die screaming. It should have terrified her. Instead, standing in that nursery with Theo sleeping between them and violence humming in the walls, Alice realized with cold certainty that she believed him. And worse, that some small, broken part of her was grateful.
Alice noticed the car on Tuesday. Black sedan, tinted windows, parked across from the brownstone with its engine running. She'd seen it twice before, once outside the bodega on 7th Avenue where she'd picked up diapers, once idling at the corner when she'd taken Theo for a walk in the stroller. She told herself it was paranoia, that grief and stress were making her see threats that weren't there. Then she saw the same car on Wednesday, and Thursday, and Friday morning when she stepped out to get coffee, it was there again, and this time the driver didn't bother to look away. He stared right at her, young, Korean, smiling. Alice's blood went cold. She turned and walked back inside, her hands shaking so badly she could barely get the key in the lock. Found Dante in his office, on the phone, speaking rapid Korean that sounded like ice cracking. He looked up when she entered, saw her face, and ended the call mid-sentence. What happened? There's a car, black sedan. It's been following me for days. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. The driver smiled at me this morning, like he wanted me to know. Dante's expression went utterly flat, dangerously calm. Show me. But when they looked out the window, the car was gone. The whispers started that same day.
She heard them in Korean at the corner store. Didn't understand the words, but recognized her own name threaded through the conversation, felt the weight of eyes tracking her movements, saw the way people stepped aside when she passed, not with respect, but with something that looked more like pity or anticipation. "They know who you are now," Mrs. Kim from the dry cleaner said quietly when Alice came in to pick up Dante's shirts. The old woman's eyes were kind but worried. "The woman who feeds Dante Kwan's son. People are talking." "What are they saying?" Mrs. Kim hesitated. "That you should be careful, that these are dangerous times for people close to powerful men." Alice felt her stomach drop. What does that mean? But Mrs. Kim just shook her head and handed over the shirts without another word. By Saturday, there were 4 men stationed outside the brownstone. By Sunday, Dante had hired 2 more to shadow Alice whenever she left the house. "This is insane," she said, watching through the window as one of the guards checked beneath a parked car. "I can't live like this." "You can," Dante said from behind her, "and you will." Alice spun to face him. "You don't get to make that decision." "I just did." Something snapped inside her. All the careful restraint, all the gratitude and fear and confusion of the past 6 weeks, it all combusted into rage. "I didn't save me," she said, voice shaking. "You trapped me. That night on the bus, when I offered to help, I thought I was doing something good, something human. But all I did was walk into a cage and you locked the door behind me." Dante's jaw tightened. "Alice." "No, you don't get to Alice me. You told me I was protected, but what you meant was owned. You told me I was bound to your son, but what you meant was bound to you. And now I'm being followed and watched and threatened because I had the stupidity to show compassion to a stranger's baby." "You think I wanted this?" Dante's voice rose, the first time he'd heard him lose control. "You think I wanted you to become a liability, to become something my enemies can use against me? Then let me go." "I can't." "Yes, you can. Just open the door and let me walk out." "And then what?" Dante moved closer, and she saw something raw in his eyes. "You go back to the Bronx, back to your cousin's couch, and 6 hours later, someone puts a bullet in your head to send me a message." He stopped inches from her. "In my world, love is a weapon. Caring about someone makes you weak. And the people I'm fighting, they don't have mercy. They don't have rules. They see you with my son, they see you in my house, and they know exactly how to hurt me now." Alice felt tears burn her throat. "I didn't ask for this." "I know." His voice dropped. "But it doesn't matter what you asked for. It matters what you are now. And what you are is the woman who feeds my heir, which means every person who wants to destroy me is looking at you and seeing an opportunity." "So I'm just, what? Bait? Leverage?" "You're alive," Dante said quietly, "and as long as I'm breathing, you'll stay that way." The conviction in his voice should have been comforting. Instead, it felt like another chain. The explosion happened at 11:47 p.m. on Wednesday. Alice was in the nursery when she felt it, a concussive thump that rattled the windows and made Theo startle awake with a cry. She grabbed him instinctively, heart hammering, and ran for the stairs. Dante met her halfway, phone in one hand, gun in the other. His face was carved from stone. "Stay inside. Don't go near the windows." "What was that?" "The restaurant on 5th. His voice was tight, controlled. "One of mine. They just blew it up." Alice's blood went cold. "Was anyone—" "No, it was closed. Empty." He looked at her, and she saw the calculation happening behind his eyes. "It was a message." "What kind of message?" Dante's silence was answer enough. Alice looked down at Theo, crying in her arms, oblivious to the fact that someone had just tried to send their father a warning using fire and explosives. Her hands were shaking. Her whole body was shaking. "They're not after the restaurant," she said slowly, the realization settling over her like ice water. They're after something close to you, something you care about. Dante's expression didn't change, didn't need to. How long until they come for me? Alice whispered. He was quiet for a long moment. Outside, sirens wailed. Inside, Theo's cries echoed through the brownstone. They're already after you, Dante said finally. That explosion? That was them telling me they know. They know about you. They know what you mean. His jaw clenched. And they know that if they want to break me, all they have to do is take you away. Alice felt the room tilt, felt 6 weeks of careful denial crumble into horrifying clarity. She wasn't collateral damage. She wasn't leverage. She was the target. The black sedan, the whispers, the surveillance, the explosion 3 blocks away from where she slept every night. They weren't testing Dante's defenses. They were mapping out their attack. And when they came, they wouldn't come for his businesses or his territory or his money. They'd come for the woman holding his son. Alice looked up at Dante, saw the war happening in his eyes, the calculation between keeping her close where he could protect her and sending her away where she might be safe, and realized with sickening certainty that there was no good answer, no way out that didn't end in blood. I should have stayed in my seat, Alice whispered. Dante reached out, almost unconsciously, and touched her face. Just once, gentle and devastating. Yes, he said quietly, you should have. But his hand lingered on her cheek for just a heartbeat longer than necessary, and they both knew it was too late for should-haves. The kindness she'd shown on a rain-soaked bus had already sealed both their fates.
Alice's arms tightened around Theo. What do you want? Simple. Dante built his empire by taking everything from everyone else. Now I'm going to take everything from him. Lim pulled out his phone, typed something, then showed her the screen. A message, already sent. Your empire or your family? You have 2 hours to decide. Come alone to the Red Hook warehouse on Van Brunt, or I start sending pieces. Alice felt bile rise in her throat. He won't. You don't understand. He can't just give up. Can't he? Lim's expression was almost curious. We're about to find out exactly what Dante Quan values more. Power, he gestured around the warehouse, or a broke single mother and a baby who isn't even hers. Dante's phone lit up at 3:23 a.m. with coordinates and a message that made his blood run cold. His men found him in what was left of the brownstone's study, covered in soot and someone else's blood, holding the rag doll Theo slept with every night. Boss, Park Jin-woo, his second, approached carefully. We have eyes on the location. 15 hostiles, maybe more. Heavy weapons. It's a kill box. I know. We can mobilize everyone, hit them from 3 sides, extract Miss Monroe and the child before... No. Jin-woo stopped. Sir? I'm going alone. The room went silent. 8 men, all armed, all loyal, all staring at Dante like he'd lost his mind. Boss, with all respect, that's suicide. That's the point. Dante set down the rag doll carefully, like it might break. Lim doesn't want a war. He wants me humiliated, broken. If I come with an army, he kills them both before we breach the door. His voice went flat. If I come alone, unarmed, and give him what he wants, maybe they live. And if he kills you anyway, Jinwoo's voice was tight, if this is just a trap to eliminate you and take everything, then you burn Red Hook to the ground. Dante met his second's eyes. But not until Alice and Theo are safe. You understand? Not until. Jinwoo looked like he wanted to argue, like he wanted to physically stop his boss from walking into an execution. Instead, he bowed his head. Yes, sir. Dante pulled off his shoulder holster, set both guns on the desk, removed the knife from his boot, the backup piece from his ankle, stood there in his ruined shirt and blood-spattered pants, unarmed, for the first time in 15 years. Sir,
Kim Min-soo, one of the younger soldiers, spoke up from the back. What should we tell people when they ask why you did this? Dante was quiet for a long moment. Outside, sirens still wailed. Inside, his empire was burning. Tell them, he said finally, that I loved my son more than power. He didn't mention Alice, didn't say her name, but every man in that room knew the truth. The warehouse door opened at exactly 5:47 a.m., 2 hours to the minute after the message was sent. Dante Kwon walked in alone. No guns, no backup, no armor. Just a man who'd built an empire on violence, surrendering it all for a woman he'd met out at bus, and a baby who cried for her in the night. Alice saw him from across the warehouse floor, saw the way he held himself, shoulders back, chin up, even in defeat, saw the emptiness at his sides where weapons should be. Their eyes met across the distance, and Alice understood with devastating clarity exactly what he was about to sacrifice. You came, Lim said, sounding almost surprised. I came. Dante's voice was steady, empty. Let them go. In exchange for what? Everything. Dante's jaw tightened. My territory, my businesses, my connections. All of it. You win. Just let them walk out of here alive. Lim studied him for a long moment, then smiled. You know, he said slowly, I almost believe you mean that. Dante said nothing, just stood there, unarmed and undefended, and waited for judgment. And Alice, holding his son against her chest while his empire crumbled around them, finally understood what love looked like in a world built on violence. It looked like surrender. Everything, Dante repeated, and his voice carried across the warehouse like a eulogy. I'll sign over every property, every account, every connection I've built over 15 years. He pulled a phone from his pocket, slowly, carefully, and held it up. One call and my lawyers execute the transfers. You'll own Koreatown by sunrise. Lim Jin-ho circled him like a shark scenting blood. And your men? Will stand down, on my order. Your suppliers, your protection networks? Yours. The 3 judges you own, the 2 precincts? Dante's jaw tightened. All of it. Everything. Just let them go. Alice watched this negotiation of empires like watching someone bleed out in slow motion, each concession another wound, each admission of power another piece of Dante Kwon carved away and handed to his enemy. This was what she meant to him, not just protection, not just obligation, everything. Lim stopped pacing, studied Dante with the calculating gaze of a man who'd spent decades reading tells and exploiting weakness. You're serious? Yes. You would give up everything you've built, everything your father built, for a woman you met 2 months ago and a baby who cries for her in the night? It wasn't a question that Dante answered anyway. Yes. Lim laughed, sharp, bitter. My God, you really have gone soft. He turned to Alice, still holding Theo, and shook his head. Do you understand what you've done to him? The Dante Kwon I knew would have burned this warehouse down with all of us inside before surrendering a single block. But you, he gestured at her with something like disgust, you walked into his life with your grief and your kindness and turned a king into a beggar. That's enough. Dante's voice went cold. We have a deal or we don't. Decide. Oh, we have a deal. Lim pulled out his phone, started typing. I'm just savoring this moment, the mighty Dante Kwon on his knees. I'm not on my knees. You might as well be. The air in the warehouse shifted. Alice felt it, a charge, a current, something dangerous building. Make the call, Lim said. Tell your lawyers to start the transfers. Let me hear you give it all away. Dante lifted his phone, started to dial. And that's when Alice saw it. The sniper. Red laser dot tracking across Lim's chest, visible only because of the way smoke from the earlier fire still hung in the warehouse air. She followed the line back, up, to the rafters, where a figure in black was positioned with a rifle. Not one of Lim's men. one of Dante's. Her eyes snapped to Dante, and she saw it in his expression, the calculation, the deception. He'd come alone, but his men hadn't. They'd followed at a distance, set up positions, waited for the signal. This wasn't surrender. This was a trap, and when Dante gave that signal, everyone in this warehouse would die. Dante. Her voice cut through the tension like glass. He looked at her, just for a second, but it was enough. Don't, she said quietly. Lim's eyes narrowed. Don't what?
But Dante understood. She could see it in the way his hand tightened on the phone, in the way his entire body went rigid. Alice, I know what you're planning. Her voice was steady, even though Theo was crying again, even though her arms ached and her face was swelling where she'd been hit. I can see them, in the rafters, at the doors. She met his eyes across the warehouse floor. And I'm asking you not to. They took you. Dante's voice was raw. They took my son. They burned my home. You want me to just what? Walk away? I want you to choose. Alice looked down at Theo, then back at Dante. The man who would kill everyone in this room to protect his power, or the father who'd give up everything to save his child. I can do both. No, she shook her head. You can't, because if you do this, if you give that signal, then nothing changes. You'll still be the same man you were before, still solving problems with blood, still building empires on bodies. Her voice cracked. And Theo will grow up watching, learning, becoming you. The warehouse was silent, except for the baby's cries. Lim was looking between them now, starting to understand. You set a trap. Dante didn't answer. Your men are here, positioned, waiting. Lim's hand moved toward his weapon. This whole surrender, it was theater. Yes. And now you're going to kill all of us. Dante's silence was answer enough. Lim laughed, a sound with no humor in it. Do it then. Give the signal. Prove that you're still the monster everyone says you are. Dante's finger moved toward the phone. One button, one call, and 15 men with rifles would turn this warehouse into a slaughterhouse. Dante, please, Alice's voice broke. If you do this, I'm gone. The moment we walk out of here, I take Theo and you never see us again, because I won't let him grow up thinking love looks like murder. They tried to kill you. I know. They threatened my son. I know. They burned my home, took everything His voice fractured. They took you, and I thought I'd lost. But you didn't. Alice's tears were falling now, hot and unstoppable. I'm right here. Theo's right here. We're alive, and you can keep us that way without becoming the man I know you don't want to be anymore. Dante stared at her, phone in hand, empire hanging in the balance. They won't stop, he said quietly. If I let them live, they'll come for you again. Then we deal with it, together, but not like this. She adjusted Theo in her arms, met Dante's eyes. Don't become that man again. Not for me. Not even to save me. The moments stretched, seconds that felt like hours. Then Dante lowered the phone. Lim exhaled sharply. What are you doing? Making a different choice. Dante's voice was steady now. Decided. You want my territory? Take it. You want my businesses? They're yours. But I'm walking out of here with my family, and you're going to let us go. And if I refuse, then my men kill everyone in this room, starting with you. Dante's expression was absolutely calm. But Alice is right. That's the old way, the way my father taught me, the way I've lived for 15 years. He looked at Alice, then at his son. I'm choosing a different way now. You're weak. Maybe. Or maybe I'm finally strong enough to walk away. The transfer documents were signed in a lawyer's office 3 hours later. Dante handed over properties worth $40 million, protection networks spanning 5 boroughs, connections that had taken a lifetime to build. He signed it all away without hesitation. Lim watched him do it, something like confusion in his eyes. You're really doing this? Yes. For them. Dante looked out the window where Alice waited in a car with Theo, both of them safe and alive and his. For them, he confirmed. You're a fool. Probably.
Your father would be ashamed. Good, because I spent my whole life trying to be him, and it took a broke single mother on a bus to show me what a mistake that was. He walked out of that office a king without a crown, a boss without an empire, and for the first time in his life, Dante Kwan felt free.
The news spread through Koreatown like wildfire. Dante Kwan had stepped down, surrendered territory, signed over businesses worth more than most people would see in 10 lifetimes. The man who'd controlled 5 boroughs through fear and violence had walked away for a woman and a baby. Some called it weakness, others called it insanity. Alice called it survival. They moved into a temporary apartment in Greenpoint, small, anonymous, the kind of place no one would think to look for a former crime lord. 2 bedrooms, clean but sparse, with windows that faced a brick wall and neighbors who minded their own business. It was perfect. For 3 days, Dante barely spoke. He'd sit by the window, staring at nothing, while Alice fed Theo and pretended not to notice the way his hands would shake sometimes, the way he'd check his phone compulsively, even though no one was calling anymore. On the 4th day, Park Jin-woo came to visit. Alice answered the door, Theo on her hip, and saw Dante's former second standing in the hallway with an envelope and an expression that looked like mourning. "I need to speak with him," Jin-woo said quietly. Dante appeared behind her, and something passed between the 2 men. Years of loyalty, blood spilled together, an empire built and abandoned. "How bad is it?" Dante asked. "Lim consolidated fast. Most of your people bent the knee. The ones who didn't," Jin-woo's jaw tightened. "3 are dead. 5 more disappeared." Alice felt her stomach drop. "Because of what Dante did?" "Because of what happens when power shifts." Jin-woo looked at Dante. "They're calling you weak, saying you chose pussy over power, that you're not fit to lead." "They're right." Dante's voice was calm. "I did choose, and I'd do it again." Jin-woo studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "I came to give you this." He held out the envelope. "Offshore account, 5 million, enough to disappear properly, start over somewhere they'll never find you." "Why?" "Because you saved my life in 2019, and because," Jin-woo glanced at Alice, at Theo, "because maybe you're not weak. Maybe you're the only one of us brave enough to walk away." After he left, Dante opened the envelope and stared at the account numbers like they were written in a foreign language. "That's your way out," Alice said quietly from the doorway. "Our way out." He looked up at her. "You and Theo, somewhere far from here. New names, new life. You could," his voice caught, "you could finally be free of me." Alice's heart clenched. "Is that what you want?" "I want you safe," Dante set down the envelope. "I want my son to grow up without men like Lim hunting him, without the weight of my name crushing him before he can even walk." He met her eyes. "I want you to have the life you should have had before you met me." "And what about you?" "I'll disappear. Somewhere Lim can't reach. Give you both the distance you need to be—" "Stop." Alice crossed the room, stood in front of him. "Stop deciding my life for me." "Alice." "No. You've been making choices for me since that night on the bus, telling me I'm bound, telling me I'm protected, telling me what traditions I'm part of and what danger I'm in." Her voice shook but held. "And now you're telling me I should leave, that I should take your son and your money and go build some fantasy life where I pretend none of this happened. I deserve to make my own goddamn choices." She looked at him, this man who'd given up everything, who was prepared to give up even more. "So here's my choice, Dante. I'm staying." He stared at her. "What?" "I'm staying, not because of some ancient rule about feeding the air, not because I'm trapped or bound or claimed." She adjusted Theo in her arms. "Because I choose to. Because your son needs me. Because you—" Her voice softened.
because you walked into a warehouse unarmed and offered your entire empire to keep us safe, and that means something. Alice, you don't understand what you're saying. If you stay with me, you'll always be looking over your shoulder, always wondering if... I know. She moved closer. I know what I'm signing up for. The danger, the uncertainty, the fact that men like Lim will always see me as leverage. She met his eyes. But I also know what it feels like to lose everything, and I know what it feels like to find something worth protecting again. Dante's expression cracked. I can't give you the life you deserve. Maybe not, but you can give me honesty, partnership, a choice. She reached out, touched his face. I'm not afraid to leave. I'm more afraid of what happens if I do. What does that mean? It means, Alice took a breath. It means I spent 7 months drowning in grief, wishing I'd died with Marcus, seeing no future, no purpose, no reason to keep breathing. She looked down at Theo, sleeping peacefully. And then I met you and your son, and suddenly I had a reason again. Not because you forced it on me, because I chose it. Dante was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was raw. This isn't built on tradition or obligation anymore, is it? No. It's not about protection or debt. No. Then what is it built on? Alice smiled, sad, genuine, complicated. Loss, sacrifice, 2 broken people trying to keep each other's pieces from falling apart. She shifted Theo to her other arm. And maybe that's not a fairy tale. Maybe it's messy and dangerous and completely insane. But it's real, and it's ours. Dante reached out slowly, as if afraid she might vanish, and pulled both of them into his arms. Alice felt his heartbeat against her cheek, felt Theo's small body between them, and thought, this is what home feels like. On your terms, Dante whispered into her hair. Whatever you need, however you want this to work. I'm done making decisions for you. Good. Alice pulled back slightly, met his eyes. Because my first decision is that we use that money to disappear. All 3 of us. Together. Where? Somewhere quiet. Somewhere Theo can grow up normal. Somewhere you can learn how to be just a father instead of a king. And you? Dante touched her face. What do you get? Alice looked down at the baby, this perfect, innocent thing who'd somehow saved them both. I get to be a mother again, not to replace Marcus, but to honor him, by choosing life, by choosing love. She looked back at Dante. Even when it's complicated. Especially when it's complicated, Dante corrected softly. 3 weeks later, Theo had his first checkup with a new pediatrician in a town whose name Alice had never heard of. He was thriving, gaining weight, hitting milestones. The doctor said he was perfect. Alice already knew that. That night, she found Dante in the kitchen of their rental house, staring at a phone he was about to throw away. One last connection to the man he used to be. You ready? Alice asked. He looked at her, then at Theo sleeping in the carrier on her chest, at this small, impossible family they'd built from grief and violence, and a moment of kindness on a rain-soaked bus. Yes, he said, and threw the phone in the trash. The old Dante Quan, the king, the boss, the feared name that made men cross streets, died in a kitchen in Montana while his son slept, and the woman who'd saved them both smiled at him like he was worth saving. And from those ashes, someone new began to grow. 6 months later, Missoula, Montana. The coffee shop on Higgins Avenue had good Wi-Fi, terrible espresso, and a bulletin board covered in flyers for yoga classes and farm share programs. Alice sat by the window with her laptop open, working on her application to return to nursing school. Through the glass, she could see Dante pushing Theo's stroller down the sidewalk. No bodyguards, no SUVs idling at the curb, no men in suits watching from across the street. Just a father and his son walking through a town where no one knew their names or cared about the empire that used to be. She watched Dante stop to let an elderly woman peer into the stroller, saw him smile, genuine, unguarded, as he cooed over Theo, watched him navigate the crosswalk with the careful attention of someone still learning how to exist without calculating threats. He was wearing jeans, a flannel shirt, work boots he'd bought at a local outdoor store because he decided to learn carpentry from a man named Bill, who ran a workshop downtown and had no idea his newest student used to control half of New York. Alice's phone buzzed. A text from Dante. "He just said data. I'm not crying, you're crying." She smiled, typed back, "I'm definitely crying. Get ice cream on the way home." "What flavor?" "Surprise me." She watched him read the message, saw the way his whole face softened, and thought, this is what redemption looks like. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just a man learning to be soft in a world that no longer demanded he be hard. Their house was small, a rental on the outskirts of town, with a yard that needed mowing and neighbors who waved when they drove past. Alice had planted tomatoes in the garden last month. They were thriving in a way that felt metaphorical. That night, after Thea was asleep, Alice found Dante in the kitchen washing dishes. He'd gotten better at domestic tasks, still approached loading the dishwasher like a military operation, but he was trying. "Bill asked if I wanted to help with the build next month," he said, scrubbing a plate with more focus than necessary. "Community center downtown. All volunteer work." "What did you tell him?" "That I'd think about it." He rinsed the plate, set it in the rack. "I'm not sure I'm ready to be around that many people. What if someone recognizes me?" Alice moved beside him, took the dish towel, started drying. "You've been here 6 months. No one's recognized you yet." "Doesn't mean they won't." "No, it doesn't." She set down the towel, turned to face him. "But you can't live in fear forever, Dante. That's not freedom. That's just a prettier prison." He was quiet for a moment, hands still in the soapy water. "What if I'm not good at this? Being normal? Being," he gestured vaguely, "whatever this is." "You're pushing a stroller down Main Street and learning how to build birdhouses. You're already doing it." "It doesn't feel like enough." "Why not?" Dante pulled his hands from the water, dried them slowly. "Because I spent 15 years hurting people, building an empire on violence and fear. And now I'm here making tomato sandwiches and teaching my son to say da-da, and it feels," his voice cracked, "it feels too easy, like I'm getting away with something." Alice's chest tightened. "You gave up everything." "I gave up power. That's not the same as making amends." "Maybe not." She took his hand. "But you're raising a son who'll never know that version of you. He'll grow up thinking kindness is strength and walking away is courage. That's not nothing, Dante." He looked at their joined hands, then at her face. "How are you so sure about this? About me?" "Because I see you." Alice smiled. "Not the man you were, not the reputation or the fear or the blood. I see the person who walked into a warehouse unarmed, who threw away his empire for a baby who wasn't crying anymore, who's learning how to build things instead of destroying them." She squeezed his hand. "That's the man I chose, and he's worth believing in." Dante pulled her close, rested his forehead against hers. "I don't deserve you." "Probably not." Her voice was gentle, teasing. "But you're stuck with me anyway." Later, Alice stood in Theo's doorway watching Dante read him a bedtime story. Some picture book about a bear learning to be brave. Dante did all the voices, badly, and Theo giggled and grabbed at the pages. This was the image she'd carry forever. Not the warehouse, not the burning brownstone, not the moment she'd stood on that bus and decided to show mercy to a stranger. This. A father and son in a small room in Montana reading about bears, safe and loved and free. Alice thought about Marcus sometimes, about the baby she'd lost and the grief that had almost killed her. She thought about the woman she'd been 7 months ago, broke, evicted, drowning, convinced her life was over. That woman got on a bus in the rain and heard a baby crying, and somehow, impossibly, That choice had led here. Love hadn't erased the darkness. Alice still woke sometimes with tears on her face, still felt the phantom weight of Marcus in her arms. Dante still had nightmares about the warehouse, about arriving too late, about violence he couldn't take back. But they had something stronger than erasure. They had choice. Every morning, they chose to stay, chose to build instead of break, chose to let the past be the past and focus on the small, ordinary miracles of the present. Theo's first word, tomatoes in the garden, coffee shop Wi-Fi, carpentry lessons, neighbors who waved. A life without fear. On a Sunday morning 3 weeks later, Alice watched from the porch as Dante pushed Theo on the tire swing Bill had helped him install in the backyard. The baby shrieked with delight and Dante laughed, really laughed, the sound carrying across the yard like music. She thought about the scared woman on the M15 bus, about the Mafia boss whose baby wouldn't stop crying, about 2 people drowning in separate oceans who'd somehow found the same wreckage. And she thought about what the story would sound like, if anyone ever told it. They'd probably get it wrong, make it too neat, too simple, turn it into a fairy tale about a dangerous man tamed by love, about a broken woman saved by money and protection. But that wasn't the truth. The truth was messier, harder, more beautiful. The truth was that Dante Kwan, the feared Korean mafia boss whose name used to make men cross streets, had been redeemed not by power or money or violence, but by a crying baby on a rain-soaked bus, and a broke single mother who'd chosen compassion when the world had given her every reason to choose cruelty. Alice smiled, watching them play, and thought, "We are going to be okay." Not because the darkness was gone, but because they'd learned to carry it together. And that, in the end, was more than enough.